Right everyone, hello, and I hope you're safe and well. And this lecture is really called What Are Serious Games? So we're going to be looking into some of the definitions of serious games. And this is just to show you once again the sort of versatility of all the different areas that they've actually been used. So we've got one game here in mathematics, medical simulations, military simulations, space exploration and horticulture, or the Martian. Branches of power, so politics, construction, engineering, disaster training and first time responses and things like that for biological, chemical, earthquake, explosive attacks, and even phobias. Obviously in our current situation you can understand why that's particularly prevalent. I'm actually working on a serious game project associated with COVID-19 at the moment. So they have been used in a wide variety of areas. So just to give you an idea of the opportunities that are associated with serious games, we'll look at what games actually are, simulations, computer games and video games. So what I was sort of saying in the honours meetings is that, coming up with a definition or an academic definition for things is actually quite an in-depth process. So there is no sort of universally accepted definition of what a game is. And then when you start to prefix the word game with different things, such as computer game and video game, that sort of compounds the problem, exacerbates the problem. And of course you've got all these other sort of terms as well that sort of surround these things. So game simulations, computer simulations, we'll have a look at that. And we'll see where serious games actually fits in there as well, and what is games-based learning. So serious games is sort of the grand sort of topic, and games-based learning, although it is used synonymously, is actually a subset of serious games. So I've got a nice little diagram for you, so you can look at that. And if you're doing your sort of honours project in serious games, then please feel free to use these as references. And why study them? They are a hot research topic for a start, and you can make a phenomenal amount of money out of serious games. In fact, a lot of graduates of the computer games technology and the computer games development course have actually gotten jobs associated with serious games, or certainly work on projects to see them through until they sort of get onto the next thing. What can we do with them? The possibilities are endless. Projects involving serious games at UWS, there are many, but I'll take you through a few. So opportunities, so applying a 40-year pool of talent, it's not really 40 years now, it's probably 50, more to the point, a 50-year pool of talent and technology to other problem spaces that can benefit from the cutting edge technologies and design practices proven in entertainment and key demographics. So it's potentially a creative way to solve existing and new problems with agreed upon comparative advantages that games and technologies readily more or less supply. So it's creation and recreation of a new field of game development with revenues already in the millions. And there's a lot of money to be made, and I'll show you some slides on that later on. We're actually trying to change the nature of e-learning, which has a bit of a sort of reputation of perhaps stagnancy, lack of engagement, lack of sort of motivation, and trying to make that more relevant. But not just about education and training, it's obviously about having sort of fun as well, and moving with the time. So the arrival of digital technology has been a big discontinuity or a singularity, so basically an event that changes things so fundamentally that there's absolutely no going back. And this is actually these are the words of Mark Prensky, who is a very sort of big name in games-based learning and serious games. And it's created fundamental differences between younger generations, which he terms to be the digital narratives, digital natives, and the older generation, the digital immigrants. So basically the digital natives, as you know, young people more or less boot their way out the womb nowadays, and they're texting and they're technologically literate just like that, and it seems to be intuitive for them. Whereas the older generation are termed as digital immigrants, and they sort of reject the idea of technology, although I wouldn't say it's necessarily beyond them. It's a bit of a learning curve, but even when you've lived sort of as long as I have, you sort of get to a stage where you think to yourself, I don't really necessarily want to particularly learn much more or learn how to use these new things. So you've got to sort of remain current. But anyway, there are fundamental differences now. The younger generation have a reputation of being technologically literate, and very, very, you get a lot of sort of older people saying, oh, my grandson, he's a whiz at computers. And you're going, well, yes, he probably is. By your standards, meaning you can operate one and you can't seem to. And then the sort of older generation try not to bother, or perhaps they're not bothered, but they can, if they apply the thought processes, learn these things quite easily. The younger generation also like sort of portability, and they get frustrated by technology that ties them to a specific location. And you know, they're always going about with mobile phones nowadays, pretty much like I am at the moment, but I'm using it to control my slides. But anyway, you know what young people are like. You are young people, the majority of you, so you understand sort of what I'm talking about. You're constantly fixated by your phone or your mobile device that sort of does everything and keeps you connected to social media, the internet, the planet basically. Studies show that they do not read as much as previous generations, but prefer video, audio, and interactive media. And some people have actually argued that they have a shorter attention span as well, and require learning in smaller size chunks. And now that you're sort of academics, I don't know necessarily what you feel or what you think about that. Personally, I think it's sort of true. We don't have the sort of emphasis on memorization and rehearsal in terms of learning, where you sit down and you look at something or you practice something until you absolutely 100% positively know it. Younger people seem to have to always be intrigued, engaged, and it's always very, very selective, and they seem to always have to be entertained all the time as well, which generally isn't a factor in the sort of older generations. I think they sort of entertain themselves, but I mean, that's entirely what you think, so you don't necessarily have to agree with all of these things, but some academics have argued that they have a shorter attention span. I would agree, but that's only decades of teaching and observing that makes me think that. Others argue that they learn more collaboratively, so this is more positive than previous generations, and demonstrates a bias towards sort of learning in situ. So here we have it here, the opportunities, the 2018 sort of global games market. In 2018, mobile games generated about $70 billion, or 51% of the sort of global games market. Now the global serious games market, so opportunities and forecasts from about 2017 to 2020, are about $9,167,000,000. So growing at 19.22% really. There is a lot of money to be made. So that was the global games market in 2018. This is the global games market in 2019, where you can see that, let's see, it's actually getting worse. Amazing. But when we project to this, we're actually sort of back on track, or at least we're increasing in terms of currency. So 77.2 billion mobile game revenues. So that's the 220 sort of global games market. So you can look at all these sort of statistics or numbers anyway, and see what you think. Okay. So opportunities, we were involved in a large number of European projects at UWS. So we were involved in the GALA project, which was the Games and Learning Alliance, which is an FP7 project. The European Commission used to throw funny money at serious games because it was seen as a sort of way of sugarcoating the learning process, and they were always sort of interested in doing that. Now, that was worth 6.5 million euros and involved 30 odd partners across Europe. And it was very, very large. And we were some of the founding members of this particular university. Then there was the Startup EU project, which was, we were the coordinating institution, and that was worth about 397,521 euros. And that was a lifelong learning project, really looking at entrepreneurship and serious games. We're also part of the continuing higher education and research using games, the Chairmug project, which again was an EU lifelong learning project. We were the coordinating institution, which was worth about €500,000. And that project is still actually continuing today through the Vice Chancellor's Innovation Fund, and actually does employ one associate lecturer on this course, and also a graduate from last year, and it's paying for me to go to a conference as well. And we're trying to get additional funding. It has a series of games that I will ask you to have a look at later on in the module. And it's also going to help you with your honours project as well, because they are statistical games, getting you to look at quantitative research methods and qualitative research methods. So a great deal of flexibility, and you get to see the result of that at some point. The project completes in approximately 2 weeks to 3 weeks time, and I will give you access to that as agreed. There's also the ECLIL project, which was worth about 400,000 euros, and that was about content language integrated learning. And then the Arguing project for multilingual motivation. So these were really sort of language-based projects, and that was an alternate reality game, storytelling, puzzle solving, that sort of thing, to teach languages. So lots and lots and lots of money. We managed to get a lot of European projects from the serious games field at this university at one point. So what can we do with games? Interface challenges, collective intelligence, data visualization, communications, therapeutic tools as well, even when you're considering things like treating phobias too. For example, the sort of slide that I showed you at the beginning, the screenshot of the game with the spider. There was a particular game to treat arachnophobia, and you had choices to go in and face your spider fears, and whether that was going to face a great big huge tarantula, 2 tiny spiders, or no spider at all. And you got the choice to actually sort of do that. Whereas, there is no risk associated with that. Perhaps people, experience palpitations, but it's certainly a hell of a lot better than standing there with a clipboard going, "Ooh, Sydney Funnel Web, here, try this one." And to see how that affects people as well. Computer science, there are a number of computer science programming applications in serious games. Ray Holder, one of the associate lecturers on the course again, is actually looking into the virtual reality to teach computer programming. So a sort of serious games application, and cultural outreach as well. So searching for definitions of serious games, solving problems is really what humans do, and entertainment probably is a problem that has been solved, most likely, or at least you can say that about it. We know how to entertain ourselves, we know how to play games and things like that, but it's up for debate. Some physicists will in fact say the universe has been solved, and you're going, yes, that's interesting, but I don't really see that we've explored the universe so far. But apparently the universe has been solved mathematically by physicists, according to some physicists that I actually know. So people are there to solve problems, and that's what people actually prefer in employment. They prefer people that can solve problems, not obstructive people that not cause problems, but are always, trying to be obstructive, trying to be negative, and never actually getting to the root of a problem. They sort of shield themselves by persistently asking questions. So people like, particularly employment, they prefer problems to be solved. So other problems, teaching people, figuring out policies, putting robots on Mars, overthrowing dictators, responding to threats. So problem solving is in fact a very big business. And play has been used since the dawn of mankind. Playing is in fact problem solving, and it's used by children particularly for conflict resolution, because as a child you don't have the verbal ability perhaps to go and have it out with someone in terms of resolving a conflict. You actually have, I always remember my nieces, I brought them back Barbies from Disney World in 1997, or I was going to, but then I saw them actually playing with their Barbies. I said, "You bitch, you stole my boyfriend. How dare you? How could you do that to your sister?" And they're sort of simulating this entire scenario. But that's how children actually resolve some form of conflict, or at least they can. So play is very, very important. And at times, we've even been very deliberate in what and why we play. So chess, checkers, the Olympics, war games, role-playing simulations, game theory, and now computer games. So in terms of the Olympics, I believe that was the first sort of documented game or writing of a game in 776 BC. I'm not entirely sure. But that was perceived as a game. We're going to toss you into the Colosseum, you're going to fight off some lions, and that's going to be a game. So here we have a sort of history of games. So it dates back to about nearly 7,000 years ago, and then you get things like whatever that is, buggery, but I don't know. Then backgammon, Go, the Olympics comes into it, then chess, Monopoly, we're moving up to Pong, the balance of power, and then computer games. And that's us just sort of started, it's just the beginning. And I don't know why I'm getting Magneto in there, it would actually be better with Count Dooku, who I have. This is just the beginning. So games are a very, very, almost an ancient concept. So what is a game? And if you look at some of these definitions, you can in fact agree with some of them or you can disagree with them. You're academics now, and your opinion is just as important as other people's. So Salem and Zimmerman 2004 define a game as a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules that results in a quantifiable outcome. What do you actually think of that? Okay, if you consider football, is it in fact an artificial conflict? Certainly not artificial to some people. Crawford, 1982, defines a game as a closed formal system that subjectively represents a subset of reality. And by closed formal, it means that the set of rules, you shouldn't have to go to an external source in order to get clarification if the rules are in fact in question. It's all there. If you look at the rules of pool, it's a great big huge book online, and you shouldn't necessarily have to say to an external source what's happening in this particular scenario. How is this resolved? The rules are there, and it's closed and it's formal. And it subjectively represents a subset of reality, perhaps objectively represents an aspect of reality. So you can question these things, and these are sort of older definitions. This definition here defines a game as an activity that is voluntary and enjoyable, separate from the real world, uncertain, unproductive. What do you think of that? And that the activity does not produce any goods of external value and governed by rules. So do you think that playing games is unproductive? There's a lot of educational benefit from games, but of course there are negative aspects of games as well. They perhaps make people antisocial, they affect your health, they perhaps make people obese. Violence in video games is another thing as well. So they're very, very addictive. It is recognised, I believe now, as a real addiction. And I have seen some people that have actually had to leave this course because of that particular sort of affliction. Um, Dempsey et al. Define a game as a set of activities involving one or more players. Its goals, constraints, payoffs, and consequences. It's rule guided, artificial in some respects. And finally, a game involves some aspect of competition, even if that competition is with oneself. Now, when I first started my PhD in 2006, I spent the first 6 months actually looking at all the definitions of what a game actually is, and realised, finally coming to the epiphany, that I couldn't actually define it. I wasn't clever enough, or there would be no universally accepted academic definition of a game. But all these definitions have some little component that can be taken into account if you're trying to come up with one that covers everything. And this definition here actually covers competition, which is quite interesting, even if that competition is with oneself. Now, I often think of that sort of Simpsons episode where Principal Skinner becomes trapped by the magazines, and he says, I maintain my sanity by dribbling a nearby basketball with my one free hand. I made a game of it, seeing how many times I could bounce that ball in a day, then attempting to break that record. So the competition can be with yourself. Joe states that a game is a rule-based system with a variable and quantifiable outcome. There's always a winner, perhaps, where different outcomes are assigned different values, okay? But this actually puts the player feels emotionally attached to the outcome, and you can see that people do feel emotionally attached to the outcome of a game. You see all the time where children perhaps smash up video game consoles online, or they're playing World of Warcraft, or they're playing online gaming, and they smash their PCs to bits because they're spoiled little gits, and obviously they're emotionally connected to the activity. So what is a game? This particular framework, I managed to sort of get this in 2000, and they have a sort of taxonomy of fun, or LeBlanc proposed a taxonomy of fun. As I sort of said today in the honours meeting, this has been published again in 2004, and it's an MDA framework, so mechanics, design and aesthetics. And it's looking at fun in games and engagement, because what is a game? What is fun? And that's what an academic will always say. How do you define fun? Fun is a very, very subjective term, and what's fun to one person might not necessarily be fun to another person. And I said that's why we have serial killers. And down here we have masochism. This means that the player can submit the character to a violent death, and perhaps an acceptable social activity to derive pleasure. In things like DayZ, you can actually shoot people in the penis and things like that. Sensation, player experiences pleasure, immersion, fantasy, narrative, story, challenges, obstacles, fellowship, the opportunity to work with others, discovery, exploration, expression. They have to feel as if they have the ability to assert their individuality, whether that's through customization or the decisions that actually happen within the game. And there's a little link there for you as well. So for those of you that are looking at fun and engagement in games, do have a look at that and see what particular elements of fun and engagement you're looking at. So what is a simulation? The term simulation generally refers to a representation of a real system, an abstract system, an environment, or a process that is electronically generated. Okay, fine, fair enough. Krokl and Saunders view a simulation as a representation of a real-world system and may focus on a specific aspect of reality. Vivako or whatever the bloody hell his name is, defines the term simulation as a replicable representation of a process, and that can be phenotypical or genotypical. So you can get really, really, really into these definitions, and there are many, many, many of them. So it's not as if you're short of research for your literature review for your honours. Okay, in computer graphics, the term simulation might just be an electronically generated representation of a real or an abstract system, a process or an environment. So interactive capabilities in image motion, so we sort of know what that sort of means. The main motivation for using a simulation is the capacity to experiment on a system that in the real world would potentially be dangerous. So, I mean, in terms of serious games and simulation, the real risk to life is more or less extinguished or done away with. So computer games, video games, entertainment has been solved. Look at what it's like nowadays. People derive massive amounts of pleasure from it. There's tons of sort of competitions, etc. And of course, there's Granny that my nephew was obsessed with for some time. He always wanted Granny to kill him, so I would say that that's sort of slight masochism, perhaps. And yes, this was actually developed in Unity 5. Very, very, very popular game. And yes, the point is that games are ubiquitous nowadays and are on mobile devices and a number of devices. And here's another sort of example there. Angry Birds in space as well. So you get all these sort of mobile games too. So what are serious games? Serious games are sort of in the middle of everything really. They're in the middle of video games, gamification and e-learning. They have a serious purpose, game techniques, fun and storytelling and educational content. They're sort of in the middle of all of that. So something to sort of think about. They are solutions to problems and can be defined as any meaningful use of a computerized game or game industry resource whose chief mission is not particularly entertainment. They're simply solutions to problems that utilize assets developed by the modern day computer and video game industry, basically. And the serious in serious game, why so serious, really refers to the purpose and nothing else, essentially. So it must solve a problem other than entertainment, and it must tie to game development sort of process in three ways, or must tie to games development in one of three ways. The application is a game, the application was in part or whole developed or designed by game developers, or the application utilizes technology or development tools originally created for games. Commercial off-the-shelf titles can be used in non-entertainment settings as well, and also qualify, but traditional drill and skill edutainment titles are something we prefer to leave behind and disassociate ourselves with, I suppose. Where did serious games and games-based learning actually fit in? So games-based learning is really a subcategory of serious games, even though it is in fact used synonymously, according to Kevin Corty, who I believe is was the CEO of Pixel Learning, I think, in this particular paper in 2006. All the references are at the end. Tan Hannigan and El Ralibi, 2009, give this very sort of good definition of games-based learning. Refers to the innovative learning approach derived from the use of computer games that possess educational value or different kinds of software applications that use games for learning and educational purposes, such as learning support, teaching enhancement, assessment and evaluation of learners. So essentially everything in there but the kitchen sink. Assessment, evaluation, learning, enhancement, technology. Okay. Zyda defines a serious game as a sort of mental contest played with a computer in accordance with specific rules. And then Sawyer and Smith in 2008 came up with a very sort of good recognised taxonomy of serious games, which sort of covers games for health, adver games, games for training, games for education, science, non-governmental organisation, defence, healthcare, marketing, that sort of thing. So this particular diagram has been published numerous times by myself. I actually came up with it when I started my PhD to begin with. I looked at games, I looked at simulations, I looked at what happened when these things actually sort of overlap. And then I tried to ascertain exactly where games-based learning, because my PhD was in games-based learning, it was entitled Using Games-Based Learning to Teach Requirements Collection and Analysis at Tertiary Education Level. So games-based learning was actually a sort of subset of serious games in there somewhere. So I got games, simulations, which meant that it converged to simulation games, then computer games, computer simulation games, and games-based learning and serious games in there. So that fantastic diagram has been published multiple times by myself and my PhD student as well. So in terms of serious game activity, it encompasses quite a number of activities. So you get Web 2.0, which is perhaps a sort of antiquated term now. You've got your audience, your industry, your research. So you get theories of learning and cognition, social networking, collaboration, technology, commercial gaming, and traditional modelling, simulation and visualization, and e-learning and training as well. And it all goes into the mix really. So here's the taxonomy. So if you just sort of look at games for education and sort of go along here, so governmental, non-governmental organisation to inform the public, defence, schoolhouse education, healthcare, games for patient education, disease management, very sort of important nowadays, games for education, marketing, communication, product information, and that's just sort of one subset of the diagram. Education, learning, perhaps a little bit confusing there. Games for education, learning, education, what does it mean? Corporate, continuing education, clarification, again, games for education, and industry workforce education. So you can have a look at that particular taxonomy as well. So what can we do with these games? Uncommon examples of sort of serious games. Games developers redoing the interface for a vehicle, been done a number of times, using consoles as low-cost sort of video conferencing devices as well. Pain distraction, LAN parties for team building exercises, like in Marine Doom, and I believe that was in the 1980s. General purpose programming, GPU architecture, sort of making movies, machinima, whatever the hell how you pronounce it. Polling methodology, economic research, exergaming, these things are rife in gyms just now. I'm actually just back from the gym myself, and you can put on the simulation and go cycling through Norway if you so desire. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and phobia treatments, as I've sort of indicated in that first slide. So why study them? There's a lot of money associated with them. Many graduates of this university have been employed in serious games research projects, and many of us have done very, very well from it, including myself. There's an increase of serious game companies, including PlayGen. Thinking World's maybe not such a thing now. I'm not sure about Future Lab or Pixel Learning, but if you look online, serious games companies in America, they're really, really taking off. They're everywhere. So it's a very hot research topic at the moment, and has been for decades. And there's been a number of research projects at this university, really quite recently, looking at the School of Media, Culture and Society, where we're looking at Brexit, the RUEU project, the Gatebull project, bullying prevention, and then other projects associated with autism as well. So lots of money to be made. And lots of publications there, and it's certainly helped my citation count, which I believe is nearly approaching about 7,000 now, so I'm nearly at professor level citation count because of serious games. Projects involving serious games, this was a sort of simulated practice game for nursery practitioners that we developed, and to actually put all of the content into that was unbelievable. We had an animator, and we had a number of children come in and record everything, and constant sort of contact with nursery practitioners and policies and procedures. And this is actually modelled on a real nursery and what sort of happens. So as you can see, it was a very, very, very sort of detailed project, and is still running today, I believe, to train nursery practitioners. And also, if you look at PlayGen, you can have a look at all of their games that they've created from a sort of framework, pretty much like sort of Unity. This was a small sort of project. I'll let you have a look at this serious game. And really, basically what this is a glorified sort of quiz. And this was developed by Maro Lana, because I got £10,000 or something to as a research grant to develop it for my modules, in order to make assessment and revision, formative assessment a little bit more fun for the students. So this is a sort of space adventure game, really. It's just a sort of glorified quiz, but it's supposed to teach people or prepare them for their programming class test. So you go along and you shoot, and then of course you have to shoot the answers at some stage. And it teaches them a whole load of different things. So I'll get you to have a look at that. This is the sort of Ecolil project. I put all the content sort of in here, and essentially we have things like dinosaur identification, whale, shark identification, animal general knowledge, and those were all in a different variety of languages, all stored in a database. And this was a sort of games engine that everyone could use. So, and it's still there for use at the moment. Playground Heroes, again, another game developed by a graduate of this course, and it was to prevent bullying and discrimination. So you can see that this is obviously the evil one from the cartoon, and that they're bullying this poor girl here, and you're supposed to take some form of intervention in order to stand up for them and receive points that way. So what's happened here? The RUEU project as well. This was about Brexit, to see whether you were pro or anti sort of remaining in the European Union. So that's what that sort of looked like. This was actually developed by Alan Williams. So another example of a serious game. So the top 10 sort of serious games, the most influential serious games, are things like Microsoft Flight Simulator from the 1980s. We're sort of moving into other games for sort of politics. A force more powerful, for example, Darfur is dying, world without oil, sustainability sort of management, and super better games for health. So I've actually got, I've just sort of written, I'll just confer here. I've actually just been writing with one of the lecturers or a reader from social science, and a lecturer from Strathclyde University for the Cambridge Handbook, and we're doing a sort of history overview of serious games, and believe it or not, it actually goes back to the 1970s. So a sort of few simple games. So that table there shows you the decade, sort of influential serious game that came from that decade, and the technological advances that actually influenced all of that, and the sort of content and skills and the game developer as well, and what sort of genre and features it actually was. So in terms of the Oregon Trail, really it's designed to teach history, specifically the realities of the 19th century pioneer life, and players have to tackle significant sort of challenges along the way. So it's originally sort of text based, and you can still play that today in 2012. So I mean that goes back to 1973. So the sort of technological advancement there was really the microprocessor and the introduction of the home computer. And then you're moving on to the sort of 1980s. And one of the most influential serious games of all time, released on the IBM PC really in 1982, was Microsoft Flight Simulator. And Flight Simulator is really the epitome of what makes serious games attractive for training, is they offer a highly immersive, realistic, high fidelity simulation experience with no risk to human life at all. So there you can see some of the technological advancements that led to that. So the home computers, increasing processing power, graphical power, microprocessor of the microprocessor, and the return of the dedicated sort of games console when you're talking about Tetris in terms of pattern recognition. So that was a very influential game as well. And then we are going into the 1990s when you have things like Doom and Quake. I mean, you had things like Marine Doom. I think I said that was in the 80s earlier on in the slideshow, so I apologise for that, but it's actually in the 90s. And Marine Doom was actually used to teach Marines sort of team building exercises. And of course, That was sort of military thinking and decision making, and the home console was a big part of that. Haptic feedback, easy access of the internet, and ubiquitous access of the internet. Moving on to the sort of 2000s, um, the serious games really increased exponentially in the noughties with the surge of production of purpose design serious games, I suppose, and you got more prolific sort of virtual worlds and commercial off-the-shelf games, and of course the massively multiplayer online role-playing games started to sort of come into it as well. And at that time, games were starting to be used for more sort of social purposes. They started to appear, so games for like teaching a force more powerful for non-violent resistance and things like that. And then sort of news games like Darfur is Dying and World Without Oil, that I sort of mentioned earlier. And then you get games for health. Remission was sort of mentioned that before. So increased diversity of games, news games, and of course we're starting to get increased interactivity in handheld portable consoles here. So in terms of skills, you're looking at to increase awareness about modern genocide, to teach players about non-violent resistance, battling cancer, and then you've got a whole load of sort of different genres as well. And then when you get into the 2010s, you get things like Super Better, and that was really by Jane McGonigal, and that was to treat her. She suffered a concussion, and she was severely debilitated at that particular time, and she decided to make her recovery into a game to make it more palatable and more workable. So she actually sees, and you can download this today, and it's actually helped me in many ways, changing my life and my sort of goals as well. So I mean, you can see like going to the gym, leveling up, getting stronger, having food, leveling up, getting a new qualification, leveling up. And then you get things like Pokemon Go, and with the advancement of sort of augmented reality, you know, sort of locating and capturing, battling Pokemon. So AR, Fortnite, cooperative collaboration, creativity, Minecraft again, creativity, and things like that, a sort of sandbox game. Now, whether these are actually sort of serious games is really up for debate, but they do serve some form of serious purpose. Pokemon Go was really to get people to walk around and exercise more. And Minecraft has been used in countless sort of academic papers and studies for creativity with children. It's actually used in a variety of ways to teach things like programming and software engineering creativity. So they still have, even though they're designed primarily for entertainment, they still have their educational and training objective as well. So essentially, once that particular book chapter gets accepted, I will make it available to you, and you can read that. That's for your own interest. But there you go. That's really what serious games are about, and it goes back to the 1970s. There was when the term was first sort of coined, and it is unbelievable to think that the serious games go back that length of time. And it seems to be almost a sort of cyclical pattern where there seems to be some form of technological advancement or something that spurs it on, makes serious games a bit easier and makes it a more viable teaching option. And now we're in a pretty exciting sort of time for the advancement of serious games, and there's lots of research to be done. And one of the key things is always empirical evidence generation. And it's a very exciting time, but associated with serious games. And as I say, I've always found it relatively fascinating myself. So there we go. That's just a sort of overview. There's all the references that I've used. As always, I'll make the sort of bare slides available tomorrow, and you can watch me in the YouTube video or the video if you so desire. So if anybody has any sort of questions or queries or difficulties, then you know how to reach me. Okay.